Welcome, everybody. And as JC was pointing out, we are set up at Phil's house. He's going to show us some of the current scenery that he's working on for his new layout. So I'm not going to steal his thunder and tell you about it. Let him do that. And I just want to let everybody know that uh, the schedule for next month, well, for the rest of the year, is the second Saturday of every month. We got that returned to us. And hopefully we can get some things happening at the community center. Uh, We're not having a whole lot of luck with that yet, but we're working on it. And February is open. Matter of fact, the whole year is open for, so if you've got something you want to do as a presentation, please speak up. Um, I get some comments and feedback, well, I could do this. Well, what would the group like that or this? What we need is commitment. Okay, guys, I'm not going to beat you to death with that, but if you want to do something, just say, hey, I'll do it. Okay, the group will enjoy it. You can be sure of that. I don't think anybody's found something here that they couldn't gain from. So with that said, let's go ahead and turn it back over to Phil here. Let him introduce what he's got going on.
I can't see myself yet.
You're there. You're there.
There we are. Well, good morning, everyone. Today, Jim put in scenery. This is a virgin layout that I have. I've done bench work. We've done a cork core, so like for the bottom layer of the layout. I've done some track work, and we've done a backdrop, which I'm actually using fiberglass from a backdrop, and I'm very, very pleased with it. We're going to kind of go over that a little bit later. It says my internet connection is unstable, and also I'm going to show how we stencil clouds. I'm going to start the program off with a little slideshow with what I model and why. And then after that, we're going to go into making a road. So in other words, a dirt road, and dirt roads were very, very common in the early part of the 20th century. Now, I model early 20th century Southern Louisiana sugarcane plantation railroads. And interestingly enough, there were about 150 plantations in Southern Louisiana, and by Southern Louisiana, I mean from Baton Rouge all the way to the Gulf of Mexico, that had railroads. They were mostly narrow gauge, mostly 36 foot, some 30-inch, and a few standard gauge, I believe 4 standard gauge. But you had close to 1,000 locomotives and 10,000 pieces of rolling stock, so it was quite an extensive network in the early 20th century. By the mid 20th century, things are pretty much gone and replaced by harvesters and trucks. So we'll get into that. Then after I do that, I mentioned I was going to go by and talk about scenery materials. Now, I'm not going to do any gluing today, so I'm not going to put anything permanent. I'm just going to talk about it for 2 reasons. One is where I want to make my road, I've changed my mind and I don't want to make a road there, but for our purposes this morning, we'll do that. And the other thing is I really like to, with my scenery, make it so that I kind of play with it a little bit. So I use a layered approach. I'll use this cork board first, then we'll put on some sort of ground goop, which I like to call it, and I'll talk about that in a minute. Then I like to put grass as the next layer. Then I like to put dead leaves. Then, and I'm talking more like a forest floor right now. And then branches and things of that nature so that you layer your scenery. The other thing that's important, and I'll point that out, is always put a figure next to a tree so that you have some perspective. If you look in Walther's catalog, and they all say that scenery is all scales. No, scenery is not all scales, because one of the most important things you're going to have is a scale ruler, because someone will have a 200-foot tree and have a figure that's 5.5 feet tall. So it's completely out of proportion a lot of times, and you always want to keep scenery in proportion, just like you do a structure, just like you do a locomotive, etc. So we're going to kind of talk about that a little bit today. So let's, before I begin, I always like to talk about something other than what I'm talking about. And as many of you know, I was in broadcasting and advertising for my career. And also I like railroads, and also I like cats. So if, I don't model C&O, but one of the things that, pardon me for turning around here, I just got to get there, was an advertising campaign that lasted for over 50 years for C&O with Chessie the cat. Now, eventually we have C&O become the Chessie system, but this is where it all began. And an advertising executive in 1933 found a picture of a little kitten like this, so that the idea was that C&O cars, the rides are smooth, and a kitten can be just peaceful and restful and sleeping. So Chessie became everything for C&O. And so all the employees, and this is an advertisement of a, everybody see that okay? Of a porter with the Chessie logo on his sleeve. So from conductors, from porters to conductors, everyone had the Chessie logo, and everything was Chessie. And my lovely bride did an outstanding job of a little montage about Chessie. So you got your watch, the conductor wore with the Chessie logo on it on both here and here. Another advertisement about Chessie. And also they even went so far as during World War II, they had a male version of Chessie who went off to the service, and there were a lot of advertisements made where he had a wrapped bandage around his paw and his leg where he had been injured in battle. And finally, one of the other advertisements they did about Chessie is my favorite. And Chessie's playing with model trains. And this dates from 1948. So kind of give you a little idea about that. So let me kind of begin the slideshow here. And can you put this on my screen so I can see it?
I'm getting it up. So this is the slideshow.
All right. Okay, so I've done a clinic for many years. I'm getting a delay, so I'm not going to do this. Called Louisiana Sugarcane Plantation Railroads. And it's from 1895 to 1970. Now, this is a part of that, but the part that I'm going to show you is some of the scenery elements that I have. Now, I've got a lot of slides here, so I want to make sure I'm not out of order. Bear with me just a second here.
Can you see on your screen right now where I am?
So the Bible for this, and we're going to take some pictures out of this and use for our scenery, is Down Among the Sugarcane. It's a book by W.E. Butler, published by LSU Press in 1980. You'll see my copy in a few minutes. The jacket's torn off and pages are marked through and dog-eared and stuff like that. Okay, change. So the history of the sugarcane industry in Louisiana, change, really begins with the 18th and 19th century. Change. Dominican priests first brought sugarcane to Louisiana in 1750. And they set up shop in New Orleans where they would actually sell sugarcane stalks in what became the French Quarter. They were very successful at that. But the Spanish were in control of New Orleans at that time, and they came along and attempted to refine the stuff, and they failed. However, what they did do was come up with a drink that they sold in New Orleans called tafia. And tafia is fermented sugar, and it started an early thing in New Orleans of drinking. So that's where we get our drinking that occurs with New Orleans, goes way back to that part, change. So we don't refine sugar until this gentleman comes along, and his name is Jean-Étienne de Boré. Now notice how I just went that French there. I did this clinic for the National Narrow Gauge, and a lovely couple came up after the clinic, and they were from Belgium, and they told me all of the words that I had butchered in French, because if you talk about Southern Louisiana, you're going to have a lot of French words. And I told them that I had an excuse because my wife, who took French in high school 52 years ago, assisted me. So I blamed her, and they thought that was okay. Okay. But Boré refined sugar. He's the first man to do that. And he is eventually the mayor of New Orleans and a very instrumental figure in southern Louisiana during the French rule and also during the American rule of Louisiana and New Orleans. Okay. Well, this is James Watt, and steam comes along about this time, and steam has a profound effect on the sugarcane industry. And it's why the sugarcane industry really took off in Louisiana. Change it. This is Robert Fulton, who invents the steam engine, and the steam engine is used for everything in sugarcane development. Change it. So one of the things that steam is used for in the early 20th century is taking the cane from the field and putting it into railroad cars, which then eventually go to the mill. And all this is the types of things you can model. To the left of the screen is a donkey, which is for all intents and purposes, a portable steam engine. And that's what ran this particular lift to get it from the car to the, from the field to the car. Can I just point at you and do that? Okay. So, and sometimes, and water is a very useful thing in the production of sugarcane, because before railroads, sugarcane was transported sometimes from a plantation that did not have a mill to a plantation that did have a mill. And they could get a great deal of cane on these barges pushed by a steamboat. Change it. Now, steam could also be used to power the mill. And we eventually get from just boiling sugarcane and to ferment it to actually cutting the cane and making the process a lot faster. Change it. So finally, steam can run one of these. And around 1888 is when we get the first steam locomotives on the southern plantations. It's really not refined until 1895 comes along, and the Godshaw Sugar Company, and Godshaw is a major player in the sugarcane industry and distributed bags of Godshaw sugar around the world. And if you remember going to your grocery store, you'd have the Imperial sugar, which is of course down near us in Sugarland, with a light blue bag, and you'd have a darker, a light yellow bag, and you have a darker yellow bag with Domino sugar, and a blue bag with Godshaw sugar. Okay. Now, the other industry that is going to become important in Louisiana is cotton. So once the cotton gin is invented by Eli Whitney, cotton and sugarcane replace tobacco and indigo as the two primary things in Louisiana. So one of the things we're going to be modeling, I am not modeling that today, but it gives us an opportunity to model these grand homes that dotted what is called the River Road. And there are two areas of plantations in Louisiana. One is from Baton Rouge to New Orleans, and it's called the River Road, and they're just dotted all along there. And fortunately, many of them still exist. The others are the bayou that would go from Lafayette to New Orleans. And both of these would follow railroad lines. Lafayette to New Orleans would be the TN&O subsidiary of Southern Pacific, and a variety of other lines from Baton Rouge to New Orleans. Okay, change. And another house is Laura.
Oh, sorry. Okay, Laura.
This is Laura. Now you notice there's different, the perception is that all the houses in Louisiana, the plantation houses, were these massive colonial houses, and that's just not the case at all. Because you had a lot of French influence in southern Louisiana, a lot of, in fact, predominantly. And this is an example of Laura. Both Homus House and Laura are approaching 200 years old, and they're just outstanding old homes. And the bottom part of this was really a basement and storage. And the second and third stories were the living quarters for Laura. Now, the other thing is you can have Evergreen is another grand old plantation there. That wonderful staircase did not come on board until after the time we would be modeling, but that really doesn't make any difference. The little two houses to the left and right of it, I can't pronounce the French, but essentially what they were is when a young man became 18, he moved out of the main house and moved into his own little house. Change it. And finally, got a little example of Victorian architecture here with Westfield Plantation. This was built in 1893, so it came a little bit later than the other houses. So the Civil War comes along, and that does not bode well for the system of sugarcane planting, the Union troops come in and they essentially want to destroy all the sugarcane plantations. However, there's 3 that are saved. Laura, Homa's house, which is owned by an Irishman, so he's not involved in the conflict. Laura, the mistress of the house, is an African-American free woman of color, which they called them at that time. And so they're obviously going to leave her alone. And the other one is Godshaw, and he does not own slaves. Mr. Godshaw did not own slaves at his plantation. So 3 predominant plantations really didn't fit into the mold of the conflict at that time. Go ahead and change. So when we get locomotives in, we have several manufacturers that are with us. One thing to notice about locomotives, this is from a Godshaw plantation. This is a Baldwin locomotive. Notice the rear driver there. It's white. That's not painted. That's not from the factory. What that white stuff is fermented and refined sugarcane. Because what would happen is the heat from the locomotives would go over the tracks and sugarcane would spill out onto the tracks, and essentially because of that heat processes, which is the way you refine sugar, it would become white, and consequently the locomotive would move over it, and you would have that white thing on that driver, and also appearing in other parts of the locomotive. So when you weather a locomotive, you would weather that, you'd weather oil, you would weather grease and stuff like that. There are very few color photographs of these locomotives, but that's an interesting feature of the locomotives. Also, notice that each plantation had their own little specialties for a locomotive. So in other words, you notice the lamps at the front and the rear. Eventually, first they were kerosene, then they went to electricity. Many times there was wood paneling on the side of a locomotive. There were also shades that extended from the top of the cab downward. Okay, change it. So Vulcan was another locomotive. Notice at the front of this locomotive, there is a light that extends out. This particular plantation wanted that large lamp to extend so that the engineer could see more of the sugarcane fields and more of what is in front of him, rather than just having a kerosene lamp stuck in front of the stack. Change it. So Davenport was another locomotive, and again, another arrangement of kerosene lamps. So each plantation their own particular criteria. Change it. Porter was another one, and Porter was probably the most common. Now this is a builder's photo. White sidewalls that they put on the locomotive, so that's not from weathering sugarcane. Change it. And finally, Cook, and this is a standard gauge. There were 4 standard gauge locomotives in all of southern Louisiana in the 150 plantations. So change it. So they had very large yards. This is Godshaw's yard, circa about 1910. To the right, you can see sugarcane cars going into the mill. They have been taken from the field to the mill. There's a locomotive, either that's a yard switcher or the locomotive that they use. Yard switchers really weren't that common because the locomotives were small and they could do both duties. And it's going to pull empties out to the field, where he will drop the empties and then come back and pick them up and bring them to the mill for the cane to be crushed and the other elements of refining sugarcane. Change. So things go along pretty good with the sugarcane industry. World War I comes along, a little hit for the industry, but this was mosaic disease. You ever see a sugarcane leaf that looks like this? It's not edible. And that just devastated the sugarcane crop in the early 20s. LSU comes along and finds another variety of sugarcane to plant. And when they do that, that solves the problem. But a lot of plantations went under because of this disease. Change. Then the other thing that did them in were floods. Louisiana floods commonly in the southern part. So this started in the 1925, a series of levees. Now levees are very, very durable. They're in fact so strong and so durable that a plane landed on one in 1990. It was having trouble getting into New Orleans airport, and it actually landed a 737 on the levee without damage. So that assisted this situation in a great way. The only problem with levees is if you model them, then they disrupt your scenery. They are put in front of your scenery. So I'm going to use them at a later date on the rear of my layout, so that what you're doing is you're looking at the layout and you're seeing the levee as it is against the backdrop. Change it. So the Depression comes along, and that does not bode well for the sugarcane industry, and followed by World War II, which comes along, and also that does not bode well for the sugarcane industry. So by the late 40s, after World War II, the railroads are kind of done and replaced by trucks. This is the ending of Godshaw, by the way. So they dismantled the railroad in the early 50s. And after they dismantled, trucks come along, which help out the harvesting, and also this harvester. This harvester can do the work of 75 men. So it takes the place of a huge labor force and is far, far more efficient than cutting the cane by hand, putting it in a railroad car, shipping it to a mill, because this can do the whole thing. This, and then a truck will pick it up, and you're there. Change it. So one of the scenes that we probably want to model is this. Every year in November, when the sugarcane crop is going to be harvested, the priest comes out and he blesses the sugarcane field. Change it. Now, this is a scene that we have modeled, and I modeled it prior to building the layout. Notice a couple of things. A, we've colorized the scene. So these are workers cutting the sugarcane. Now, notice something interesting here. If each man is 6 feet tall or thereabouts, notice that the cane is far, far taller. Sugarcane is a grass that grows up to 18 to 20 feet. And notice that it's at the roof line of some houses. Well, the other thing that's neat about that is that it will hide one of these small narrow gauge locomotives and the consist that's on it. So you can use the sugarcane to hide locomotives, and you can use that as an artificial staging track, which makes it kind of neat. Change. So when I model that, that's precisely what I did. Now I'm going to redo this and make this cane a little bit higher. And the way I'm going to do that, this is store-bought sugarcane here, and in front of it is a product I'll show you in a minute, which replicates the cane leaves. So I'm going to cut those, and my poor photography here, make them a little bit more to scale, and also make them higher so that you're completely hiding that locomotive that's to the right of the picture. Change it. Now, this gentleman, I'm sorry, I don't know his name, models Hawaii, which I've been to a couple of times and looked at the sugarcane fields there. And notice this nice red clay that he's got. Well, red clay is very common in northern Louisiana. It's not common in southern Louisiana, because southern Louisiana is pretty much on the same latitude that we are here in Houston. And it's that black gumbo type soil. If you use natural materials on your layout and you, for some reason, are modeling this part of the country, I do not recommend that you go outside and put black clay on your layout, because it will make a first-class mess. And it won't look very good. Change. So here we are getting the cane to the field, and this is sugar cane in the field that's being put in a car, and it's eventually going to go to the mill. Change it. So a lot of times, as I mentioned earlier, it came by barge. So it would come from a plantation that did not have a mill to one that did have a mill. So this is cane being taken off of the barge, which is pushed by a little miniature, not miniature, but a smaller steamboat, and put in a car, and then that's going to be switched to a mill. Change. So once it gets to the mill, it goes through this little chute, and the cane is put up there, and it's cut by these cutters. Change. This was actually taken in Hawaii. And also, once it's cut, next there's a Corvallis engine. Change. Which is more of a modern technology there. And then once the sugar cane is boiled, cut, and refined, it's stored in a sugar house, which is all plantations had these. Change. So Sometimes sugarcane is bagged, change. And it's put on a railroad car. This picture is actually from Cuba, and this is a narrow gauge car there, change. Or they make molasses. Now they make two types of molasses. One of the types of molasses, generally what they would do is take that and ship it to a candy company like the Mars Candy Company. Laura had an exclusive contract, the plantation Laura, with the Mars Candy Company, and would ship molasses to them to make their candy. And so molasses was put in wood in these tank cars and shipped in that fashion. The other thing that they made was called blackstrap molasses, and what that was molasses mixed with some other substance for cattle feed and horse feed. So that was not shipped in tank cars, but that was another byproduct of sugarcane. Change. So when we're making a model railroad out of what we've talked about, what do we want to model? Well, we want to model Louisiana sugarcane plantation along the Mississippi River from Baton Rouge to New Orleans circa about 1910. Multi-scale and multi-gauge to add depth. So I'd like to put some, I'm going to have essentially 2 gauges and 2 scales. So you're going to have standard gauge on the layout, and standard gauge would be taking cane from one mill to another, or from one plantation to another. Gauge, multi-gauge, some of this is going to be 30-inch gauge, which was very common and used internally on the plantations. And the other gauge would be, as I mentioned, standard gauge. And I want to try and do a little in scale on top of a levee to add a little depth to it. We're going to use mirrors and detailed backdrops, and you'll see what we've done with the backdrops. The staging yards are hidden, as I mentioned, by the sugarcane, and also by kind of a unique system I've got here, using canvases in front of a fiberglass backdrop. Lots of trees. By the way, I have probably 700-800 trees that will eventually be on this layout. Now, these are from 2 other layouts, trees that I've bought, trees that I've made, just a wide variety. I want to give a plug at this juncture for my daughter-in-law, Lexi Stewart. Lexi is a professional organizer by trade, and she has started an attempt, which will probably be one of her more challenging jobs, of organizing me. Now, she has done such a great job that she has taken all the trees that I have and organized them by type of tree. So she's got palm trees, she's got oak, she's got pine, whatever it is. So if you're interested in someone helping you organize things, give me a call. And I guarantee you she'll do a good job for you. So I want to mix small plantations with no mill with large plantations with multiple mills. Water is important, and we've got areas on the layout which the tables are not connected because that's where we're going to have a water feature. We're going to feature the Sabine River. We're going to feature Bayou Teche and also the Mississippi River. We're going to show other industries on the layout. We won't be doing that today, logging and oil. And I have converted the prototype logos from 3-foot gauge to 30-inch gauge because you just can't find anything in 3-foot gauge that are these 40 type of locomotives and this type of rolling stock. So I'm going to use static scenes from time to time because the layout's small. I don't have enough room to make a complete loop of a layout of a particular piece of track. So we're going to have a point-to-point, maybe impractical, so we may just use a static scene, change it. So the criteria is I want to model one plantation with a mill, one plantation without a mill, and we've started that now. A variation of architecture in the main houses. Where I'm able to put a house on there, we will, and we'll have that distinction. Want it geographically correct. Originally I thought I would just do plantation by plantation. That's not really going to work that well. So, it's going to work well where we just combine elements in different plantations. Unusual rolling stock. There's a couple of cars that are different and interesting, things you have not seen. One is called a weed killing car. So they put gasoline or some sort of petroleum product on a car and then spray it on the ground. And so we did that. Change it. So here we are back at Laura again. And these are the elements of Laura. that was not the original paint of that house. The original paint was white and the roof was green. However, I like that combination better. For some reason, I've got this little thing that continues to pop up on here. Let's change it. So one of the problems in doing this type of layout and this type of research is that a lot of times you cannot find information on these railroads. So the guy that wrote this book, W.E. Butler, that we talked about earlier, found the owners of Laura, now the Wagon Sack brothers, and he asked them, he got an artist to draw from their description a picture of some of the sugarcane fields. Now, Laura was like a lot of other plantations where they had a little passenger railroad that would pick people up from a dock along the river, or it would take them, a lot of these plantations owned other plantations, and it would take them to the other plantations. The other interesting thing it was used for is that they would use this to take the school kids to school, because the plantation is really a little miniature industrial city and everything that you need is on the plantation. So this is something we modeled prior to this change. So we model this prior to it. And, you know, you would cut a sugarcane field, you just strip it. And you always wanted to have crops in rotation. So you would cut every 3 years and they would have multiple fields. And you never wanted to deplete your sugarcane change. So here we are back at Homa's house. And this is a grand old mansion. It is still open. You can go there today and visit. It is not a bed and breakfast, but you can have an event there. And also there's a restaurant there, change. So this is the mill at Homa's house. This is one of the reasons I do not model in ON3. Because if you did that particular mill, it would be to the ceiling. This is a short ceiling type room. So that's why we model in HO, not in ON3 or ON30. Change it. So one of the features that you want to do are quarters. Now the state of Louisiana has come back and done plans for some of the, of course, these were slave quarters in the prior to 1865. And, but they were usually a row of houses, a wonderful canopy of these oak trees that are there. And again, another dirt road change. So this is an overview of Homa's house, showing the foreman's house there in front, the quarters on the right and left, and the mill, which is right under us here. And you can see to your right a empty load of cane that's going back out to the field to be have cane put in it. Change it. This is Godshaw's plantation. You can see the fields go right up to the mill and the associated things. You can see smokestacks, you can see a water tower, lots of things that you can model in this. Telephone poles, etc. Change. So this is one of the pieces of rolling stock I was talking about. This is a weed killing car. Nowadays, you can see to the left, you can see whatever they have, either gasoline, petroleum, whatever they have that's on there, which butane, which they put through this thing, and you know, fire comes out the front of it and kills the weeds. OSHA would have a fit with this today. This would not exist today because of that very reason. Change it. So this is Godshaw again, and this is coming out of the mill with a full load of cane. Change it. A sidecar, you can see on the left, there's a standard gauge track. It's kind of hard to see. But essentially, they did double duty. So if they wanted to take the cane someplace else, they take it out of the narrow gauge and put it onto a standard gauge car for a mainline road. Now, one of the things, they did not have tracks that had both the narrow gauge and the standard gauge on them. They did it the old-fashioned way, and I think in an efficient way, and that's one of the reasons that the railroads stopped being in existence in southern Louisiana. Change it. So this is a scene that we're going to model. This is a levee. And as I mentioned, planes landed on levees. and so did trains. And this is from an advertisement for the Texas and New Orleans. And notice there's no logos on the train because they really weren't sure what they were going to do or where they were going to put them when this advertisement came to be. Notice to the left, there's a cypress tree, which is a wonderful thing to model in this. It is difficult to model. It's almost better to just buy them ready-made. You can get these, ordering them online. And I can tell you that's St. Augustine grass in this depiction here on this hillside. Change it. So these are color trees, a color picture of our cypress trees. Always went into water, and the green slimy thing is called duckweed. It's fairly easy to model. If you just use some old Elmer's glue and you get some green paint and mix it around until you're happy with it, I would do a trial run with this because it's not the type of thing you want to put permanently on the layout until you're real sure that that's what you want to do. And also I would put some of these logs, make little stands for them underwater rather, and so that they're properly aligned when you pour this mixture on there. Go ahead, change it. So this is a swamp. Now most people think of a swamp as being very small, and that's not necessarily the case. And a lot of people make a mistake in making lily pads and make them the size of a Volkswagen. But again, going back to doing it in scale. Change it.
Sorry. There we go.
This is actually from Herman Park, and this is vegetation that's on top of the ground, on top of the water. And that's realistically the way a lily pad would look, because it's going to, you okay?
Got him muted. It's good, we're fine.
Okay. But usually the lily pads would take the course of whatever they're in. So in other words, if it's a smaller thing, they're not going to grow large. If it's a larger place, they're going to grow larger. Change it. So again, this is this duckweed. And again, this is from Herman Park, where they're trying to replicate swamps around here. And it's a good place to take photographs, and you don't have to travel 150 miles, 200 miles to our east here. Change it. This is another thing you're going to find on Louisiana, in southern Louisiana. This is neat, and that's a wonderful root structure to model because it's very, very rare that the water line goes below the roots. And it's kind of neat to model. Change it. And of course, we want to add some creatures to our layout, and this is alligators that are common in southern Louisiana. There's a lot of sources of alligators. Change it. Sequoia and Stevens International make them. I'm going to suggest that the metal alligators, once you paint them, go in the water. The rubber ones, I suggest you put them on ground because sometimes your water mixture will eat that particular type of rubber. Change it. Change it. Turtles are also common, and with turtles, they're always on a log, and you put 4 or 5 of them on a log. This is one of the only, go back to where it was, I'm finished with turtles. This is one of the only color photographs that I have. You can tell again the white sidewalls that are used, and various grime that's underneath the stack. The wood panel underneath the cab, there is a shade, although it is not taken out. It is now retracted. Long stack, 2 different colors. To give you an idea of how you can weather it. And it's one of the rare color photographs of one of these little fornies that they had. Change it. This is interesting, isn't it? They put a tractor on top of a homemade car, and that's what they're going to use to pull this in and out of the yard. It's kind of a yard switcher. Go ahead, change. Cane cars, this is a unique truck arrangement where you've got the trucks in the middle of the car and spaced apart. I'm not sure how that's difficult to do when you model because of balancing. And also the other thing they use Lincoln pin couplers, which when I do this clinic, I get into that. Change it. So every plantation had a weigh station. If you had cane that came from other plantations, you want to weigh it and keep a record of it. Notice that the tracks are essentially at ground level, no ballast, and all that stuff around it is cane, and we'll discuss that a little later. Change it. So you have an engine house, which has a lot of character to it. This is from Westfield, and Westfield documented everything about the last day of the plantation, which was 1963. So it has a wealth of material on it. Change it. And we're back to Evergreen. Now, Evergreen, and that wonderful staircase I mentioned, but also gives you an opportunity to model formal gardens. Change it. So this is formal garden. And there's several types of material that you can use. A little scouring pad will make these hedges just fine. And also, it's the same color. Change it. Now, everyone should have one of these on their layout. Anyone got any ideas what this is? No takers? That is a 2-hole Grecian privy. So it's kind of an interesting modeling thing. We sometimes model outhouses, but I'll bet you've never seen one like this. Change it. So finally, this is a scene that we're going to attempt to model in a few minutes. And I'm going to build the road. And a couple of things let's notice about this particular scene. This is cane coming from the Godshaw mill being taken someplace else. And it's being taken to the Godshaw mill to be weighed and also taken out as cut cane and refined sugar. There's a little angle between the track and the road, which we're going to attempt to duplicate. But notice there's mostly sugar cane on it, grass and dirt. Virtually no ballast on this track at all. And again, that's our dirt road. So let's build the dirt road here. And here's what I'm going to use. This is and by the way, I'm a big book person. I highly recommend. You ready for me to get back on camera?
Yeah, you're on camera.
Okay, I can't see myself. Can you get me out of that screen?
Again, I shouldn't be sharing. Let me stop the share.
Okay, that's fine. This is Basic Senior. It's by Lou Sassy. Lou Sassy is an outstanding modeler. He is just a genius with scenery, and I highly recommend that you buy one of his books. There's other books on scenery. This is from Kalmbach, Model Railroader. It's not as good, I think, as Lou Sassy's. So we're going to use his formula today and make a dirt road. Dirt roads are very common in the early part of the 20th century. I'm going to make one that's a little straight. A dirt road is much more interesting if it curves and hides itself in a grove of trees and then goes into some sort of backdrop so it disappears. It's much more interesting that way rather than the straight road we're making. Also, dirt roads many times followed a particular rail line. So the dirt road will be next to the rail line. So I'm going to get up, JC, and go to the other camera. Tell me when you can see me here. See me okay?
Yeah.
So these structures are not going to be in this part of the layout. I've just laid them out to show you a couple of things. So a dirt road is necessary to get to all of these. So if you model on an old derrick, you got to have a road to get to it. You got to have a road to get to a house. You got to have a road to get to a barn. You got to have a road to get to a church. You got to have a road to get to a warehouse. You have to have a road to get to a factory. So that's a component you should consider when you're planning your layout. I'm not in camera range. There we are. So let's start with our dirt road here. Now, here's the components that we're going to use. I wrote this down so we get them in the right order here. Now, when you're building this particular formula, it is going to make a first-class mess, not a second-class mess or a first-class mess. So I'm not going to put the components together. I've already got some already made so that we don't destroy half the room here. But you do 2/3 of a cup of glue. Just regular old Elmer's glue all will work. You do a cup of paper mache. You do a cup of vermiculite. You get this at your garden store or wherever. I actually found all of these materials at Ace Hardware. I probably paid a little bit more for them, but they were all in one place. You want to get some paint, brown paint, and this is Benjamin Moore. Now, if I tell you what the color of the paint is, it's not going to be that when you get to Benjamin Moore's store or wherever you get it, because these names change all the time. So you want to get the formula for the paint and always refer back to that. If you're not happy with the overall color of this, you might want to add an earth color from Woodland Scenic, some sort of liquid pigment or something. Now, the other thing is what type of material to use on our road. Well, let's see which one it's gonna work well with. Well, we don't want to use styrofoam. It's too brittle. Other types of styrofoam aren't really going to work that well because it's too absorbent and it's not going to look that good. Styrene is not really going to work either because it's difficult to cut. But what's going to work real well is foam core. And it's lower than the material that we're on as our base over here on our layout. Now, when you put this on, you want to use foam putty to put it on as opposed to glue. That's going to work the best. And this is better done differently than I'm doing. It's better if you put this, paint this, and put it on the surface where you're going to model. But because I'm going to change it, I don't want to do that today. So I've taken all this formula, and we're going to call it goop. Now, we also know what it may look like, but let's use the word goop right now. So I'm going to kind of re-energize this. You want to kind of make it the consistency of peanut butter. And I put a little water in here, and also I've used Lysol. And Lysol is going to keep it without getting mold in it, and also it's going to kind of rejuvenate it when it's been in here. Now I'm going to mix this up because I don't have an exact formula here. And I'm also not going to use this particular one to put on the layout because it would just take too long to mix all of these things together. And I've already got one made. So if we mix this, it probably needs to be just a little bit more here. Mix it up just a little bit more. And again, the mixture's already been done. So what I'm doing is just making it more of the consistency of peanut butter here. So we're going to take our foam core and we're just going to put this using a variety of our tools here on it. It's going to take you a while to mix this all in and get it the exact height that you want to get it. Now, the good thing about this is it's already going to come weathered, because just in the very process of putting it on, you're going to have ruts and stuff like this. Now, you want to take a scale vehicle, whatever that is, and you're going to want to put it while it's wet, and you're going to want to make ruts in it. And again, I'm only going to do a little bit of this just as a demonstration. So you can kind of get the idea as you smooth it out and make the road a little bit smoother. It's beginning to take shape as a road here. So a variety of tools to use to shape this out, and it's going to take a while to get it just the shape that you want it and just the height and consistency. And it's not an exact science. You'll want to come back with a combination of water and glue and fill in some of these holes. Now, if you can see, the top part of this is fairly smooth. So you can see how it's taking shape. It's very smooth here. Can everybody see that? Can everybody see it, JC?
Yes.
Okay. So what you're going to do is just continue that on until you get one that looks like this. Now, after you finish this process, while it's wet, you're going to want to put sand on it. And again, this, I go back to not wanting to I like to use natural materials, but you have to be careful that the material that you're using. So you just want to maybe sprinkle on here. And what you're trying to get it to do is to absorb into the mixture that you have so that it doesn't look like sand laying on top of it, but it gives it a more gravelly look because that would simulate the rocks. So you can see if we spent some more time with this that you'd eventually cover this. Now, because this is so thick, you don't have to paint this. You don't have to paint this foam core, because the thing about it is that paint, you know, it may not absorb this stuff as good as the regular foam core is. So that's kind of an advantage of it. But you'll want to have some dips in here, make some ruts, and as I mentioned, take a vehicle while it's wet and put it on each side of these. Now, I measured this. This is a scale 16 feet. So let's make our road realistic. Now, a lot of the roads were only 8 feet across because they just were one lane. Now, that's fine. But on a model railroad, it just doesn't look that good. It just doesn't look like a road. You need it a little bit wider to replicate a road. So again, taking one of our tools and just doing this, and depending upon what type of tool, you know, you just want to play with it here. Also using a larger putty knife to go along here. So I'm now going to take the one that I've already made, and let's go over to the model, or let's go to the layout. Now again, I'm trying to duplicate this road, so I've already.
No, you're going to need to turn so that you're facing the camera.
Oh, all right. Okay.
You're blocking what you're doing.
No, this is where I'm working. Is that okay?
Yes, I got it.
Okay. So I already have my cork laid down for the layout, and I've already cut this piece out. Now, when I'm coming along here, I want to, and as I mentioned, I'm just not going to have a road here because I think it's too close to the edge of the layout. You don't want that. But you would bevel based upon where you're ballasting into this so that it's beveled. If you can pull up that other slide, that last slide we had, or either I can use the book.
I'll get it.
Okay. So this will just slip right in to where we're modeling. And also, if you want to use some sort of clump foliage, something in between where the track is and where this road is, that's fine. Just however you think would be best. You can use maybe grass. You can also use two of these I've found. One is woodland scenic, it's burnt grass. And the other is fine turf. It's a yellow grass. Now, yellow grass is common at some portions of time in Louisiana. Some fields will turn yellow. So if you'll mix those two together, put some clump foliage in here, you'll be fine. Now, my layout or my road here has ruts. It's uneven. It's ugly. And that's exactly the way we want it. So if I were going to do this, I'd go ahead and scenic this and put either clump foliage or whatever I had. And this is the material that I'm using for this. Foam core, it's an 1/8 of an inch thick. I'd like it to be a little bit lower, but it's not, and that's what I found. Now, over the years, I've collected.
Jerry's Artorama and Texas Art Supply both sell thinner foam core.
Oh, I went to Texas Art Supply, and I couldn't find it, so I asked for it. And I went to actually 2 locations, so maybe I I asked for the wrong thing. But over the years, I have gotten a lot of products from Woodland Scenics and also Scenic Express. Got static flock, I've got coarse turf, I've got fine turf, I've got static grass, and I've got static grass flock. I've got coarse turf. Of course, I've got my ballast that I have here, and various degrees of paint. And we'll move over and show you some more things as well. So when we're modeling, what I like to do with a scene is I like to just plan it out. As I mentioned, we're not going to, lay anything down permanently today. But what we are going to do is I'm just going to show you some of the things that make up scenery. The two most important parts of scenery is a scale ruler and a blender. And you will go a long, long way with those two items. So we've talked about some of the Woodland Scenics products available, but let's talk about some other things that we can use. I mentioned clump foliage. Let's see, I'm going to put these down over here. So this is a fine green grass. This is excellent for St. Augustine grass. And St. Augustine is going to be prevalent in this part of the country. Polyfiber is good, but watch it because it will all of a sudden be 8 feet tall in a scale relationship. And if you use just a part of it and use your ruler to be in scale with a figure or something like that, that'll work best. Remember our hedge that we had at Evergreen Plantation. Well, here you go, but also you can use a scouring pad that's this same type, and the green is even more realistic to the prototype. So something that works good is the Driftwood Scenery Company. I found this at some swap meet or something. Only paid $1 for it. And originally, I guess it was $8. So I got a good deal on that. But that's great to make a thick foliage. Scenicapes is also good for that hedge that we looked at if you're modeling something around a house or something like that. Just other polyfiber that I've collected over the years. Lichen, I'm not a big fan of lichen, but it does have its place. And moss. This is great. This is ashland, which is another product I'm going to show you in a minute. But moss is really great. But again, here's a piece right here, moss. Well, scale, that's 12 feet. Okay? So you just have to watch that part of it so that it looks realistic. Back to a Bachman product. If you remember the cypress trees we had, if you get driftwood and then drill a hole in it for each of these little things here, that'll replicate a cypress tree. You'll be better if you go ahead and buy one, because I think that looks a lot better than what I can make. I prefer to make trees, but if there's something that's going to look better, for instance, the sugarcane plants that I showed you, it actually looks more realistic if you make your own just using a toothpick and a particular product I'm going to show you in a minute called Excelsior. However, having done that, it would take you forever to make 500 plants or so. So it's best to use a combination. So let's move on to some of the other things, coarse turf, that are going to make up some of what we want to do. Now, I'm a firm believer in once you got the forest floor down, is that you use some natural material. These are pine needles. I put some of it in the blender, and I would do it again, but it just makes sense to just snap them so that you have a small piece. Now, a lot of times you blend this very fine, and then you put it on a cookie sheet and you bake it. I'm not a big fan of baking. I prefer to use this just naturally, just so that I have everything to scale. But in doing so, this will get kind of ripe after a while. So you may want to go to your hardware store and get some sort of pine scent. So sand is always important. And I've got lots of sand. This is oak leaves. So if you have a pine forest, don't put oak leaves down in front of it. Again, these need to go in a blender. Take the little sticks and get your scale ruler out and make them to scale. So what are some of our products that go in scenery? Well, figures. I've been collecting figures on I guess since 1985. So I've got figures. Got a company called Model Tech, makes the best figures. And so these particular figures here, and this may be a little hard to see. If I just put them up the camera, can they be seen here?
Yep.
Okay, so those are loggers. And see, there's a lot more detail in the figures than you normally find in HO. So anyway, that's important. So that's part of scenery. Well, animals are part of scenery too. So my little box of animals here. So I mentioned turtles, and we have, and I mentioned we have horses, pigs, cattle, horses, pigs, and I've also got some alligators in here. We also have a dog in here. So, you know, where appropriate, you have deer, have some deer. So figures are important to a layout. Other thing that's important to a layout are vehicles. Well, you model for the era that you're modeling in. Now I model the early 20th century. So over the years, I've found vehicles that model that. Here's a tractor that's a little bit past that vintage. But you can see on our road over here that we've made the road, and we're going to put this vehicle right where the ruts were for that. I mentioned earlier a couple of products you may not be familiar with. And by the way, you can use hydrocal as a base on paper towels, sculpt a mold. You can seal some things with caulk. Isopropyl alcohol is important. Glue again, and I have probably 10 different types of glue depending upon what you want to glue. If I wanted to glue this road bed to the benchwork on my layout, I would use this because it glues cork to foam core. So you want to match and read what your glue will be used for. Sprayers, where you mix glue, water. Now, one thing about sprayers and spray paint in general, back far away if you're using spray, because the force sometimes would just push your scenery off the layout. Brushes, tape measures, T-square, all of those little tubes here that you can mix your glue, eyedropper type things. Brushes, probably have 40 types of brushes. And I mentioned trees. Now, one of the things that you're going to find interesting, you may go to the hobby shop and find logs to put in a particular railroad car if you have a logging scene. Go out in your front yard and find some sort of branch or something that's fallen off. Take your scale ruler and let's do about a 25-foot log here, or maybe a 30-foot log. So it's going to be right here. And we just take these giant cutters. I don't cut myself here. Let's see if I can do this without. Yeah, there we are. Now I've got pine leaves and I've got oak leaves in here. So we've kind of got a nice little log here. Here's one I cut earlier, which is a much longer log. But see how realistic that looks? It's so much better than my plastic logs. So we talk about trees. Well, oak trees are magnificent on a layout. Thing about an oak tree is that the canopy is wide. It is not up. Oak trees go out. They don't grow up. So piece of driftwood, nail, a couple of types of foliage over there, clump foliage, a few others, just put it in there and it goes on your layout. Now I want to suggest that we take a little figure and we put him or her next to your tree here just to get some perspective on it. Now tell me if you can see this, because this is a small figure here.
Really can't see it because of your hand.
Yeah, well, I'm putting it in, so as soon as I'm going to take it out. So
There we are.
yeah, that's not bad for perspective. But you have to watch that because, you know, you don't want the tree to overwhelm the figure. Now, this would be just fine if you had a grove of oak trees as an entrance to a home, an old southern plantation, because those trees are 200-300 years old. So they're going to be much taller. Cypress trees, as I mentioned, you'll always want to have, excuse me, a dead tree in your forest. If you go the pine tree route, now let's talk about pine trees. Pine trees are not like Christmas trees, okay? They grow horizontal. I'll get some water in a minute to wet my whistle here. So branches grow up much further than it would on an oak tree. If you go out and look at a pine tree, you have to get way up to see where the branches begin. I would take the bottom layer and put it on the floor of the forest. So some of the branches have fallen off. So that's kind of it about scenery as far as different things to use, components, things of that. But also there's just all kinds of stuff that are involved in scenery. I forgot these guys. Telephone poles are involved. Fences. Got a whole box of different types of fences. Let me get this guy open here. So just different fences, colors of fences. And one of the things is just, like I say, over 30 years of either doing it on 2 other layouts, buying at estate sales, making something, buying something store-bought, is how I've kind of come to acquire all these things. Okay, I'm going to move over here now. Now, the other thing that is important to a layout is backdrops. Now, I've got all the layout cluttered by all the things I was showing you.
I've got you moved back to the camera behind you, the silver camera.
Oh, all right. So should I sit down?
I would if you were.
Okay. Well, let me stand up because I need to stand up to do this.
Okay. Well, I've got it pointing at you.
All right. Okay. Can you move it over towards and show the backdrops?
Sure.
Okay. So notice the backdrops. This is fiberglass. I am very, very pleased with fiberglass because I've used wood for years. I've used other things, and it has no seams. Look at this. It's very, very flexible. And notice that curve I made here. When they join together, you can hardly see the seam. So you don't have to do anything. You don't have to putty it or anything like that. Also, I want to do a valance here. I'm going to change the lighting and maybe make this a little bit lighter. So the valance is going to hide what I've done back here. So I have LED lights for all my lights. Can you get back here? No.
We can see it from where we are right now.
Oh, really?
I've got it pointed up at an angle.
But
So
this
we
is
can
this
see.
yeah, but this is inside the valance. Can you see the lighting?
I mean, we can see it. We can see what you've got the Christmas lights up in there.
Yeah, kind of. Okay.
They're visible from here.
Well, there's 2 strands of lights that I've used. One is an amber color, one is white light. That balances the light pretty well. Plus, you can see in the back, I've got 2 large LEDs, about 1,600 lumens. And I took out a closet when I made this, when I made the room. Now, the reason for the canvases is that's going to hide staging tracks. And the reason I want to do that is because I don't want to chew up real estate from taking this thing 2 inches out. If I can just use the part where I want to hide them, that's the eventual goal. Now, I don't have the front part of this. I don't have all the scenery in front of it so you can see it. Also, what I can do with this, if for some reason, whatever I decide to do with that, I want to make a one-dimension scene on the backdrop, and I don't want to paint it. A lot of us use wives, spouses to paint, or other persons. I don't have to have them come over here and paint that. There's 2 screws right at the bottom on each side that I just pick it up, give it to them, and then put it back down. So I can take it off the layout and have them paint it. So we're going to make some clouds today. I love clouds. Clouds are real simple. What I suggest you do is you go take a picture of clouds. And when you take your picture, you go and you print it, and then you try, and with a nice piece of poster board or something, just follow the outline of the cloud with an X-Acto knife. Now this is from New London Industries. If you know John Lawrence over in San Antonio, master model railroader. I have used these for 30 years on 3 layouts. So I've got one on the wall. And the other thing is that when you paint your blue here, by the way, this is 2 different materials here. So this is fiberglass sheetrock. And it's real difficult to tell where one ends and where one begins. When you paint all at the same time, use a sprayer, and back off or push forward so that it all blends together. Canvas looks as good as the fiberglass, looks as good as the sheetrock, etc. And as I mentioned, when you buy paint, if it says Sherwin-Williams Universe Blue in a book, it's not going to be Sherwin-Williams Universe Blue. So be happy with your color. Get them to paint it on the same surface that you're going to bring. Bring a piece of fiberglass over there. Bring a piece of wood. And you have them painted on that surface. And then you have them dry it with a dryer. Now, Ace Hardware, I found, works real well with that. Lowe's, Home Depot, because of their shortage of personnel, it's going to be harder to do that. So really, we can use Rust-Oleum, this matte white. We can use this kiln. So let's paint a little bit. If I can get this off, we'll do that. Always spray something first so it doesn't glob up on your screens. And just kind of take a step back and just lightly spray your cloud. Now, when you're doing it on the layout, after you finish that, what I would do is just spray down to the bottom just a little mist, because that's the way clouds are. If you want to make a little rain in it, get you some gray. And you put a little gray in it. So I'm going to let that dry a little bit. Then when you take it down, you're going to get what we've done here. So you can take these 4 patterns and mix and match them any way you want to. And, you know, don't do the same thing. Also, watch your corners. You don't want a straight edge on this. So the sheetrock's a little stippled. So it does not look as good as the fiberglass. And it doesn't look as good as the canvas. So that's my dog and pony show. Anybody got any questions?
See, folks, do anybody have any questions for Phil?
You mean I've covered everything that you would want to do?
Posed any questions? Yeah.
I got a question.
Okay, what you got, Scott?
What
Sure.
you keep referring to a fiberglass material for the background. Is that more of a plastic, or is it fiberglass?
It is actual fiberglass. You go and you buy it from, I don't have a full sheet with me. It comes in 4x8 sheets. They're about $30. It's available, I know, at Lowe's. I don't know about Home Depot. One side is very, very plain. One side is rough. The other side is smooth. And this is a piece that actually came off the valance. I just replaced it.
And
But it's 4x8
that-
sheet, about $31.
and it's definitely fiberglass and not plastic.
No, it's absolutely fiberglass. Yes. And one of the reasons that I chose it, and that's what it says, fiberglass, when you buy it. One of the reasons that I chose it is because I said, well, I didn't want to float a wall, and I didn't want to do a lot of the other things. But I said, well, what type of car uses fiberglass that they build it with, and the paint looks fantastic? That's a Corvette. So I thought, well, gee, I'll bet the paint will really look good on this. So I think it did. And I think it also did a lot better with the clouds. Because as you can see, the stippled effect, when I take off that, it'll be a nice cloud, but it won't be as nice as these over here because it sometimes runs a little bit with the sheet stippled effect.
Does the back side of that have like little bubbles to it?
Yes. It's hard to see, but it has a texture to it.
It's a textured back and then
Yes,
smooth
okay.
on the side.
Right. It's like what you put as like backsplashes or bathroom. You find it in the
Okay.
home section. Yeah.
Anybody else? Well, thank you guys. I enjoyed showing you things.
Thanks very much, Phil. You did a nice job for us.